All right, well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about the gods of Egypt? Stick around and find out. Dum da da da, dum da da dum, dum da da dum, dum da da da, dum da dum, dum da da, dum da da, dum da da dum, dum da da dum, dum da da dum, dum da da dum, dum blah. Anybody know that? Extra points if you can figure that one out. It's a video game. And it makes me think of this movie, or maybe vice versa. But anyway, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Play Productions, and this is my uncut review of The Gods of Egypt. Now, the synopsis on IMDb reads, Mortal hero Beck, great name, teams with the god Horus in an alliance against Set, the merciless god of darkness who has usurped Egypt's throne, plunging the once peaceful and prosperous empire into chaos and conflict. So yeah, we got a plucky young, kind of roguish, thieving hero who's trying to impress his girlfriend and steals things, and oh, isn't he a troublemaker like Aladdin, and he gets on this big adventure, and I feel like we've done the thief in like a Eastern country before. We've got Aladdin, we've got Prince of Egypt, Prince of Persia, and now this. So anyway, another thief hero in the East. But anyway, the tone on this one is mostly a light, fun adventure tone, not my kind of movie, really. If you think Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where it's kind of like an amusement park ride that all the characters are on, you're not really concerned for everybody, they might furrow their brow a little bit, but really, it's nobody's going to be in trouble, it's fine, and the only time people get hurt is when the plot wants it to happen. The balance of like what a character survived and then what actually gets them is really out of whack. So the hero is never really stressed, never really afraid, never really in pain, never really trying too hard. And that's a difficult thing for me in any movie, but especially a movie like this. The dialogue, I would say, is kind of jokey. It feels a little bit like a Marvel movie, or like it's trying to be like a Marvel movie, but with an Egyptian-ish coat of paint on it. It's a little bit bummer if that's what's going on. I just kind of wonder if, like, hey, these Marvel movies, they got these jokes. I think that's working. I feel like there's suits somewhere in Hollywood that are maybe saying that, the fantasy genre's not working. What it needs is more jokes and lighthearted humor. Oh well. There's lots of action and adventure, but there's no intensity for me because everyone is too capable, especially the mortal hero, Beck. And oddly enough, he struggles more against a regular mortal opponent who, as far as we know, doesn't have any particular awesome combat training. He struggles more against this guy in the climax than he does in multiple fights, mano a mano, with gods throughout the movie. So like I said, when it's convenient to the plot, that's when a person struggles, or that's when a person gets stabbed, or whatever, There's no rhyme or reason. Anyway, I just want to say to the people that are making this movie, it's Alex Proyas, who directed, I think, The Crow, and I know he directed one of my favorite movies of all time, which is Dark City. Fantastic, dark, very different from this. And so, I like him as a director so much, or certainly at least what he's capable of. And so, I didn't even know that going in. When I saw at the end credits, I was like, oh, really, Alex Proyas? Oh, man. Bummer, dude. Anyway, I just want to say, Alex, just like spray some water on a few foreheads of these actors and tell them to just look a little more nervous. It's not that hard, so I feel like it must be a choice, because you can do that, If you think back to, I mentioned Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I'd rather this was more like the first 3 Indiana Jones movies, where, yes, it was an adventure, and yes, he always managed to get through things, but Harrison Ford was good at portraying a guy who is like really struggling, who's really nervous. He's got sweat on his brow. I mean, you're just like, oh my gosh, he's really getting put through the ringer. He's having a hard time of it, And I just didn't feel that for really any of the characters in this movie. So like when they got stabbed, it wasn't just, after them struggling a whole lot and then being overcome or anything. It was like, oh, I guess this was the moment to surprise us, and oops, the blow got through, or the knife got through, or whatever. So I didn't care about the story at all. It wasn't really interesting, and certainly I wasn't invested emotionally in the characters. And for all of that, the runtime was way too long. It was 2 hours and 7 minutes. This should have been 90 minutes, I think. As far as the cast, there's a mix of familiar faces, some of them, and also some less familiar ones. But I mean, they all do fine. There's just no character layers for anybody to be playing with here. The performances are all just a step or two above flat and boring. So in other words, not flat and boring, but I mean, not a whole lot more than that. And again, we've got great actors, I think, in this cast, certainly solid actors. They just didn't have a lot to work with. As far as the stunts and visuals go, there's tons of CG and fantastical visuals. There's creatures, there's magic, there's epic locations. I went to this movie and I was like, if it just scratches a little bit of my fantasy movie itch, because I'm hungry for fantasy, because Hollywood just doesn't make much fantasy. They make a lot of sci-fi, and these days a lot of superhero, but not a lot of like old school fantasy. And this did scratch some of that itch for me. But they didn't take it seriously enough, and I like my fantasy to be largely serious with maybe a few comic relief moments here and there. But the other problem with this movie for me was that the CG is obvious to my eye, and that's just my thing. I'm cursed with an eye that picks out CG. And the green screen work stands out even more in this movie. Not in like a cool stylized 300 kind of way, but in a rushed, didn't feel like matching the lighting on the set kind of way. It's just like the actors are standing out from the background. It's just, this is, okay, all right. The stunt work also has plenty of CG actors taking over for real people. Now there's some cool wire work and some cool, regular physical stunts, but there's definitely moments where like, oh, that dude's jumping off this thing, and right about there, he's now a cartoon as he lands. It all looks cool enough, but if it looks as fake as a video game to my eye, I'd rather have the controller in my hands to keep me involved. As I implied at the beginning of this, if you haven't gotten the extra points by now, this movie made me want to play God of War. I wanted to go home and I want to totally fight some gods and be and just beat the snot out of them, But I want to do that. I'm watching these other people do it, and it all looks fake anyway, so I'd rather go home and watch something fake that I get to control, The music, likewise, supports the overly light tone that basically every chance it gets. Not in the big action sequences, it's not all light and fluffy. There are some cool action sequences, and plenty of them actually, where I think they're trying to take the moment seriously, but in the non-action scenes where people are talking and stuff, there's kind of jokey lightness to it, and the score just emphasizes that in those moments, I might have been able to take it more seriously if there was actually no score in those scenes, but the fairy tale vibe to the score in those moments just kept me at a distance from the characters and the situations they were in, even more than I was already. Okay, so is there anything of, relevance in terms of moral issues, philosophical issues, religious issues, theological issues, spiritual issues, any of that might, come to mind or spark up conversation as a result of seeing this movie? Well, maybe. I think there are two major themes that might come to mind in that realm. The first one is that gods are flawed and humans have a better moral compass than gods do. During the climax, this isn't really a spoiler, but during the climax, the protagonist god actually regains the fullness of his powers, which he has lost for much of the movie. He regains the fullness of his powers after apologizing to a mortal for the way he had treated him. The main mortal character has lost faith in the gods. He thinks that they're not worth following and stuff like that because, just life is bad or whatever. And this god apologizes to him, and that's where he kind of evolves and becomes the god he's supposed to be and gains his full powers and stuff like that. Polytheism is alive and well in America. I think that's worth taking note of, even though we don't think of this as maybe a polytheistic country, but it's alive and well here, whether in some form of Wicca or Hinduism or Latter-day Saint belief systems. It's all over the place. But even if you're a Christian, this theme of flawed deity, I think, has real relevance. We can almost as easily as Christians view Yahweh, the God of the Bible, as the way many polytheists view their gods, as being in development and incomplete, or even flawed and in need of our correction. Especially in our difficult times of life, we can be filled with fear or anger or grief, and just in the midst of that conclude that God can't possibly have a good reason for causing or allowing what is happening to us. Now, if we look at the Psalms, we see that there's plenty of room for us to just have it out with God and ask why, or express anger or despair. But the psalmists don't stay in that zone of anger and let it turn into bitterness, like we can so easily do. We can decide after hearing a couple unsatisfying thoughts on suffering from a few well-meaning Christians, that we've heard the definitive responses that the God of the Bible offers. Okay, well, I tried, getting answers from the God of the Bible. We can decide at that point that we don't need to look any further for answers, or we can even inwardly commit to the idea that we don't want to hear any more biblical responses to suffering, because at least if we decide that God is petty or non-existent or powerless, we gain a measure of perceived control over a life that feels in those times horribly, horribly out of our control. I think there's genuine natural appeal to seeing God as flawed, and I think this story illustrates or captures some of that appeal. I don't think it does it intentionally necessarily, but I do think that's there. The second theme that I noticed, and this was a big one, this was like in the dialogue, is that the afterlife is earned through good deeds and compassion. Now, Osiris, king of the gods, announces at the beginning of the I almost said the game of the movie that everyone is welcome in the afterlife. Then a usurper to his throne changes the law, and this is the main problem that the heroes have to solve in the story. He changes the law about the afterlife and now demands riches as payment to enter into the afterlife. And then at the end, the new god king at the end of the movie, he says that now things are, better, but he doesn't go back really to what Osiris says at the beginning. He has his own spin on it. He says, from now on, the afterlife will now be earned through good deeds and compassion. Because what we do in this life matters, he emphasizes. And that is absolutely true. Absolutely true. The Bible speaks of the significance of what we do in this life, the eternal significance, and the reward that will be reaped from our obedience to God in this life. But the Bible doesn't teach that those good deeds and those acts of compassion are what gain us entry into heaven or the afterlife. So I think all three of these views here are broken. The view that I don't think I need to argue against the afterlife being bought by money. If you want me to, then make a note of that in the comments. And if I hear enough feedback on that, But I don't think anybody's going to say, yeah, that's a good idea. We should be supporting that. So I'm not going to argue against the afterlife being bought by money. But I would say, how can a good, just, and compassionate God allow the afterlife to be open to everyone, as Osiris does? If we all end up in the same place, all of us, then we're just going to get more of the same that we have here, but with no hope for an end in sight. It might be nice for some for a while, it won't be forever, but for many more, it will immediately and throughout eternity be hell, because there'll still be around the same kinds of people who have hurt or taken advantage of them in this life if we're all in the same place. So what reason, and I would add to that, what reason do we have to think that, after we die, we'll just instantly become people who aren't selfish anymore? I don't see any reason for us to believe that that's just going to happen somehow because of something that we do. We just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps like, oh, I'm in heaven now. Now I better get serious and I'll just be perfect now. What evidence do we have that we are capable of doing that? If the afterlife is earned through good deeds and compassion, well, who decides how much is good enough? If God is himself a constant work in progress, as Horace is, who pronounces this at the end of this movie, he's a constant work in progress and he has a flawed moral compass. Well, he certainly can't decide that, so who's going to decide that? And if God has a perfect moral compass and is himself perfect, why would he allow any evil to go unpunished or uncompensated for? That's not just. If God is perfect, then he would also want us to be safe from all evil forever and create a perfect environment for us to live in forever. And if God is perfect, he would want us to enjoy spending eternity with him. After all, a perfect, holy, and all-loving being, that's the best person to spend forever with, and God would want that for us. But I'm not compatible with that. Neither are you. I mean, at best, if you and I get into this afterlife place, even if it's, based on our good deeds or whatever, but we're not perfected, at best, we're going to get on somebody's nerves, and at worst, we're going to bring pain to other people. But that doesn't sound like the perfect eternal community that a perfect God, a perfect and loving God would create. He wouldn't settle for less than perfect bliss forever. So something has to change. We have to change. And as I mentioned before, we have no reason to think that upon death we will instantly perfect ourselves. Only God can do that for us. But here's the problem. He values us too much to make us love him. You can't make anybody love you or make us submit to his redesign of our character. He wants to give us choice. So we have the choice. We can enter the afterlife and go into a quarantined place where we can continue to live how we want and spend all of eternity trying to justify ourselves through our good deeds and compassion. And that place is called hell. It's not the image that I'm sure springs to mind for many of us when we think of that. I did a video on what hell actually is according to the Bible. I'll try to remember to put a link to that somewhere that's easy for you to find. But that's what hell is. It's a quarantine for people who just want to live the way they want to live, and they're also going to deal with the consequences of that. Or we can admit that, we can't perfect ourselves, and we're not compatible with a perfect community and a perfect God unless he rescues us and provides some kind of compensation for our selfishness and somehow redesigns our character. We have to be willing to submit ourselves to that. And that's the gospel in a nutshell, because Jesus offers that through his payment for our sins on the cross and the new and perfected life that he exemplified through his resurrection. So all that to say, that was a bit long-winded, and I don't think those thoughts, all of that I just said, is what's naturally going to spring out of this, but it's what came to mind for me. And I would put out there that for anyone offended by this movie's treatment of Egyptian gods as being real beings, I'd like to suggest that this movie is actually a useful springboard for thinking or talking about some things that really, really matter. It's rated PG-13 for fantasy, violence, and action, and some sexuality. I have no idea what your tastes are, so if I were a time traveler, I would go back in time and say, Pater, it's not a movie for you, but it could be useful as a springboard for worthwhile conversation. So if people start talking about it, or if someone invites you to see it with them, go watch it. I don't like numbers and scores, but if you do, how about a 7.0 out of 10? That's a C in quality. And then how about for relevance, let's give it an 8.0-ish. That's about a B in terms of, how likely it is to bring worthwhile conversation or thought to mind. All right, so those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. You can also support this channel by visiting spiritblade.com and seeing the geek entertainment that we have designed and prepared there for Christian geeks like you. Spiritblade.com. And then, I just picked this up. I'm supposed to say, if you like, please like, share, and subscribe if you like this video and you want to share it, or you want more videos like it. So those would be the reasons. Then please visit, christiangeekcentral.com for a ton more content and community. I hope you join us there soon as we continue, where's the button, to geek out and seek the truth.